Welcome back, everybody, to Neutrality Studies. My name is Pascal Lottaz, and today I'm joined again by David Pyne, a former U.S. Army officer and Deputy Executive Director for the EMP Task Force on National and Homeland Security. David, welcome back.
Pascal, it's great to be with you.
It has been a while since we last talked. You especially had a very close look at the entire development of the Trump administration. I mean, from when he was actually running for it, and you were, like many others, a big fan of the idea of the United States not going to forever wars and new wars in the Middle East. And this, several times you made the point that this is how he scored amongst the MAGA crowd and so on. And well, now we are nearing the end of the second month of the war with Iran. Although today, as we speak on this April 22nd, we just had the news that you broke to me that Donald Trump actually indefinitely extended the ceasefire. Can you give us maybe an update of where we stand today?
Yeah, I mean, it began with Trump making more threats that he would, certainly go to military action. He thought that bombing Iran was the best choice. And then it was just about 2 p.m. local time that here in the United States, or I guess 4 p.m. Eastern, that he decided to go ahead and issue a indefinite extension of the ceasefire. Initially, I mean, he'd been saying for many days that he was highly unlikely to renew the ceasefire. But essentially, what happened is Iran, the deadline, of course, is going to expire around 7 p.m. tomorrow of the 15-day ceasefire. He had said actually, I reported on my Substack that on Sunday morning, he told a Fox News host that that everything was negotiated. Iran had agreed to all our terms, and that the peace deal would be signed Monday night. And of course, I knew that was very far from reality. But I reported on that anyway, and it's just it's gone in the opposite direction because Iran has stated that the U.S. is committing multiple ceasefire violations with the blockade, the seizure of an Iranian tanker by U.S. Marine Corps troops. That's unacceptable. Until the blockade is lifted, then there will be no peace talks. So essentially, Iran backed out of the peace talks. JD Vance's plane was grounded. It never got off the ground. And he met in an emergency meeting this earlier today. Might have been this morning, or it might have been early this afternoon, with the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, probably Marco Rubio. I'm not sure if he's in Washington, D.C., but I'm sure he would have been zoomed in. And they made the decision that going back to war, making good on Trump's threat, because clearly there was going to be no agreement by tomorrow night, was going to be a bad move for the U.S., for President Trump, because it would hurt us politically and economically. In terms of, obviously, his approval ratings would continue to tank. The Republican Party's chances of winning the 2026 midterms in November would go even lower. And so he made what I think is the right choice, which is to extend the ceasefire. He should have gone a little farther and said he was temporarily suspending the blockade to get for a certain period of time in order to give Iran an incentive for peace talks. But he's appears to be under the impression, I think, very flawed, mistaken impression that the blockade will bring Iran back to the table and force them to accept his maximalist 15-point peace plan.
But so JD Vance actually never made it to Islamabad. He didn't leave Washington, or did he fly back?
He never left Washington.
And the thing, though, is that we get all of these reports that actually there are now between 50 and 60,000 troops, U.S. troops, amassed somewhere in or near, well, the Gulf area. I have no idea where they are, because you obviously also don't want to make them sitting ducks to be hit. But we have reports that this amassing of troops is happening, and we have predictions by people, including General McGregor, that a invasion is actually imminent. So do you think that this is actually Donald Trump giving in to reality and at least not going to the kinetic phase anymore of the war, or is it just another deception, another ruse to try to lull in the Iranians before probably on Friday night, Saturday morning striking again?
It's definitely a ruse, based on what we've heard from a recent Wall Street Journal article. I think it was published this morning or else yesterday. It basically said that Trump is he's really scared of being another Jimmy Carter and having a ground invasion of Iran in which, you know, hundreds, perhaps thousands of U.S. troops are killed or wounded. He thinks that would be a disaster that would tarnish his presidential legacy and tank his numbers probably to the low 30s or the 20s. So he is very, very much loath to do that. I think that he is wanted an out. I mean, he's really. There have been reports that perhaps even as early as the first night of the war, when the USS aircraft or the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln was targeted by four subsonic Iranian cruise missiles. I think he got a little bit spooked by that because Iran obviously they started a regional war on day one of the war. They escalated just as they promised they would, and Trump hadn't planned for that. He didn't believe that Iran would escalate by attacking the Gulf states or all of those U.S. military bases that have been destroyed, 13 thus far. And so he's at least since March 21st, and I believe much earlier than that, we know for certain that he's been trying to beg Iran for a ceasefire. It used to be that the Democrats here in the U.S. would accuse Republicans and Trump of things that they were guilty of, but Trump and the Republicans were not. Now things have been turned on their head because Trump is accusing the Iranians and Israel, Netanyahu, of course, of things that they're not guilty of, but we do, in terms of being a rogue state, of engaging in terrorist strikes. I mean, certainly Iran has engaged in terrorist strikes, but they've tried hard to avoid this war. Once the war started, they've refused to end it, certainly. But because they're trying to essentially restore deterrence with the U.S. and Israel, they've not. They've chosen not to reveal the existence of what I believe to be a mononuclear arsenal. But they are trying to increase the pain level for the U.S. To the point that Trump will never even consider striking them again.
Hey, very brief intermission because I was recently banned from YouTube, and although I'm back, this can happen anytime again. So please consider subscribing not only here, but to my mailing list on Substack. That's pascallotta.substack.com. The link's going to be in the description below, and now back to the video. So you don't think that actually that on Friday, Saturday, we're going to see an attack by the United States, a sneak attack on Iran? You think like Trump is trying to actually use this off-ramp?
Yes, he has communicated to his aides based on multiple reports that he wants the war over. He said the reports say he's bored of the war. He wants to move on, maybe to Cuba. I think he's excited to maybe blockade Cuba. Maybe reports indicate he wants to kidnap the president of Cuba, kind of Maduro style. He thinks that's much more doable because, of course, Cuba's 90 miles away from the United States. It's a much smaller country with a much smaller military, so it's a doable. It's an much easier win, and then kind of browbeat them into, opening up their industries or to investment or U.S. political influence. But I think he understands that Iran is, it's a tar baby, it's a debacle, it's an unwinnable war. All the things that probably I know I predicted, and I think you probably predicted as well, that it would be a strategic disaster if the U.S. Went to war with Iran, and that's what all the war games were showing. The U.S. military war games that were done over the past, I think, 20 years have shown that the U.S. could not win a military victory against Iran. I think it was the Fox, or I think it was the Wall Street Journal also that reported that, or maybe it's New York Times. Yeah, it was New York Times that reported that there was a kind of a chaotic internal discussion, and basically General Kane said regime change was impossible, and Rubio said, so basically you're saying it's, kind of BS, Israeli propaganda, and JD Vance, of course, opposed it. But Trump was the only one who believed Netanyahu's propaganda campaign when he did his U.S. intelligence briefing in the Situation Room on February 11th. That kind of, I think it was February 12th, that he said, okay, it's a go, let's do it. And, we had 2 weeks to prepare. Actually, yeah, 2 weeks to prepare, 16 days. and that's it just wasn't planned. It was planned as a 4-day war, maybe a 7-day war, and of course it became a 6-week war essentially.
So the fact that he now extended the ceasefire indefinitely, I mean, from the U.S. side, that we still need to see whether Iran agrees. Right, a ceasefire is a two-way street. Iran could say like, no, we're not extending. I mean, this is over. We're going back to kinetic. We're going to go back to attacking. But that would be untypical for Iran because usually they wait until they're struck first. But let me maybe ask, what does it then mean that the blockade is still up and running? Because a blockade is also a act of war, and actually the United States is doing an extended blockade, not just of the coastline of the Strait or of some ports, but highly illegally, just of the entire country, and now seizing tankers, Iranian linked or Iranian flagged, anywhere on the high sea. How do you think that will go down?
Well, I think the U.S. naval blockade is adhering to the rules and laws of war. We've exempted food and medicine, so we're going after tankers. Um, and we've decided to not, Trump said today, he said today that we're blockading the Strait of Hormuz. Actually, that's not accurate. We're blockading Iranian ships and any ships that go to and from Iran. So it's a blockade that's limited to Iran and any ships, neutral ships or allied ships that travel to and from Iranian ports. But it's a blockade. You're right. It's an act of war. That's what Iran has claimed. That's why they're refusing to meet with the U.S. until the blockade is lifted for any peace negotiations. And I think rightly so. I think they have a good argument on that because obviously that's a violation, an egregious violation of the ceasefire. It's an act of war. A ceasefire, means a ceasefire essentially. So um, I don't think I think that there have been reports that Iran has rejected the ceasefire extension, but in practical terms, that rejection is meaningless because, as you noted, Iran is not an aggressor country. Yes, they've supported terrorist proxies against Israel. I think they were highly supportive of the October 7th strikes, Hamas strikes on Israel. But ever since they've made very clear that they never wanted a direct war with the U.S. or Israel, it's kind of been like a low level war, an indirect conflict, much as the U.S. has done to Iran and other countries, kind of a proxy war. And they've been pushing peace, but they understand that if they let the U.S. off the hook right now without increasing the pain level, that the likelihood of Trump coming back in 8 months and starting another war with them are probably pretty high.
Yeah, and again, the blockade is still up and running, right? So the United States still trying to strangle Iranian international trades, all seaborne trade, apart from also the rail links that the United States already bombed, and to inhibit overland trade of Iran inside the country, and the link with China. Do you think that Iran will just like not do anything anymore in terms of warfare as long as the blockade is as long as this trade this seaborne trade blockade is up?
Yeah, I think, well, of course, Iran has stated that they have engaged in drone attacks against U.S. warships. I've seen no confirmation of that. I think that's dubious that they've done that. But certainly that's the risk, is if we fired on an Iranian tanker with a destroyer, 5-inch shells, took out their engine compartment. So if we continue doing that and we're conducting kinetic strikes on Iranian ships, they're going to have a much higher incentive to do the same to the U.S. And of course, we know that U.S. destroyers are well within range of Iranian anti-ship missile strikes. Our carriers were bringing a third carrier strike group. The USS George H.W. Bush carrier strike group has moved around the Cape of Good Horn, South Africa, because we were afraid to risk the carrier in the Red Sea because in the Strait, there in the Red Sea, the Houthis have Mach 4 supersonic anti-ship missiles, including anti-ship ballistic missiles the U.S. doesn't even have. that very well could disable or even sink that carrier. So we're bringing a lot of warships in there to secure the blockade, but most of our ships will be dedicated to carrier air defense and not actually enforcing it.
Right. So will do you think the US will be forced to also lift the blockade at some point, because it's not feasible anymore, either because it costs too much or because it will cost too much goodwill also from third countries who want to trade with Iran, because let's not forget, it's not just blocking Iran's right to trade with others, it's also the blocking the right of others to trade with Iran, which is a very historically speaking, has a lot of precedence. That's usually what happens in war. That's what Napoleon tried to do to the Brits, and the Brits to the continent, and Hitler to everybody else. You usually try to inhibit anyone from trading with your enemy. The United States during the Second World War had a Trading with the Enemy Act, which they applied also to third neutral states and so on. But eventually, these things tend to come to an end because they anger everybody else. How do you see it? Like, let's say, together with China and Russia, uh, the blockade.
Well, the problem with the blockade is it's a counter blockade, of course, because Iran is essentially blockading, most of the ships coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. So if Iran wasn't doing that, I think Trump could maintain that blockade more or less indefinitely. The problem is that Iran is blockading all the ships that we want to go through. We want to get through our blockade, which is the Gulf state ships and any ships that aren't doing trade with Iran, and so Trump's counter blockade, which he says is closing. He's now saying that we're the ones that are blocking and closing the Strait of Hormuz, as if that's a good thing. When he's spent the last several weeks, threatening Iran that they need to open the straits. And the reason that's a problem is because it's going to increase the price of
Yeah.
oil and other goods, fertilizer, and create scarcities. We've seen that I know South Korea, probably very soon Japan and Europe. Robert Pape, I think, was interviewed the last few days. He's a foreign policy realist scholar and who studied economic sanctions, and he says we're going to, within probably a few days, later this week or the weekend, there's going to be not just increased prices, but shortages. So, that's going to invite a global recession, a U.S. recession, and it's going to happen. It's going to alienate our allies and hurt them. It's going to hurt Americans. It's going to make the cost of living higher, and it's going to anger, the American people against Trump, and they're going to, deliver an epic wipeout of the Republican Party in both houses of Congress. So, I think you're right. I think we're going to see Trump, I think in short order. I think within the next 4 weeks, he's going to be forced to lift the blockade. And he'll probably make up some excuse for that. And he'll, do it, he'll just say, we want to get this over with. We've decided to temporarily lift it or suspend the blockade just to get a deal. And then if we get a deal, the blockade will be over.
Yeah, I mean, the amazing thing that Donald Trump managed to do is that he completely established the fact that he can live in his own world, right? He could declare victory tomorrow. The Iranians gave up. We won. Therefore, blockade is lifted. Let's declare Victory Day and have a parade in Washington. I mean, he could do that. He could do that, and everybody would go along with it. Of course, not the Iranians. Everybody would see through it, but they would go along, and especially New York Times and so on would actually then do very serious analysis on how true the claims are and so forth. I mean, it's a really bizarre moment, actually. Um, but so overall, you would think that the strategy of Iran to just, Iran didn't need to win the war; it just needed to keep standing. And Iran, in a sense, doesn't need to defeat the blockade; it just needs to keep standing again or keep sailing. So that will just continue.
That's correct. Yeah. I've been saying from the beginning that Iran really has two objectives. They need to win the war. That's to maintain their regime, to maintain some kind of ability to strike with, thousands of missiles, which they do. There's a recent article here in the U.S. press that I think it was in The Hill and another media source as well that said Iran maintains, according to U.S. intelligence, Iran maintains thousands of missiles and drones, including anti-ship missiles that it could use to bombard Israel, to attack U.S. allies in the region, to shut down energy infrastructure, and to sink U.S. warships. So that's one objective. The other objective, of course, is to maintain control of the territory in dispute, or the sea in dispute. And that, in this case, that's the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. So it's everyone knows, or should know, that the victor in a war is the side that maintains control of the disputed territory, which in this case is the strait.
Right. So what do you think the Israelis will be doing? I mean, but how it looks to me from here is that Netanyahu and the IDF would actually want the war to continue, right? I mean, not their war, not them fighting Iran, but they would want the United States to continue fighting. How do you assess the role of Israel?
Well, Israel, we know, for several weeks was killing off all the moderates. Everyone, according to Trump, he had like three different choices for who to replace the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and all of them were killed by Israel. So he's killed off all the moderates. Now there's the hardliners that taking control. The IRGC essentially is running the government through their proxies. The new Ayatollah, of course, Mushtaba Khomeini is considered a hardliner. He's always been an IRGC ally or asset, fully aligned with the hardliners, and he's got every reason to want to kill Americans, or and Israelis, because we killed their first family. We killed his wife, his sister-in-law, his niece, and his father. So, yeah, he hasn't manifested that way. He hasn't done anything drastic, but certainly the risk is high if we were to restart the war, and if we were to take out their energy grid, if we were going to take, their power plants, their oil refineries. I think, Iran could potentially not only do the same to our Gulf allies, they could engage in massive cyber attacks against the U.S. homeland as well.
So, what is this now doing, this situation, to Donald Trump's base? I mean, again, you've observed that from years ago and from the inside, from CPAC and so on. What's the mood at the moment within the Republican Party?
It's mixed. I have friends that are hardcore Trump supporters. He could practically join the Democrat Party and they would follow him and say he's putting America first. I mean, they're complete zealots, cultists, cult members, essentially. But there's also there's about 13 million Republicans and independents that voted for Trump in 2024 and no longer support him. So he's lost about 17% of his voting base. And that's, of course, not just the war. It's the economy, obviously, has taken a big hit, but and a much bigger hit because of the war. But I do think the war is a big reason for that. And he has completely blown up his base, his conservative political base. He's attacked Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly and Alex Jones and other folks. Obviously, Joe Kent, who served as his director of counterintelligence. Someone who's always been pro-Trump, still is pro-Trump, but he's a principal opponent of the war. And the problem is with President Trump is he equates any disagreement on a major issue as disloyalty, and so he lashes out at people who've never attacked him, but are merely critical of his policy in the belief that he's putting Israel first and America last, and that's really hurt him a lot. And if he were to run for re-election, if it was tomorrow night, he would lose in a landslide.
Do you feel sorry for JD Vance? Because I mean, Vance was kind of the designated heir, in my view, of the MAGA movement, and it seems to me that Trump just wrecked all and any hope for him to basically pick up where he left off. Also, like remembering, I will never forget Donald Trump's speech that he gave. What is it called? The commencement speech at the beginning of the presidency, like
Inaugural address.
or the inaugural address.
Yeah.
When he literally said, because I thought those were brilliant words. We will not only be remembered for the wars we ended, but also for the wars that we never got into. So that was a brilliant thing to say, and then he did the exact opposite. Will Vance suffer, or will the entire movement basically suffer from this? And is it over for MAGA the way we knew it?
Yeah, MAGA has been subjected to a hostile takeover. They've been taken over by the neocons. They don't even realize it. I mean, 99% of congressional Republicans voted to give Trump a blank check to fight the war indefinitely. You know, it hasn't turned out as badly as some of us feared in terms of the ceasefire. If the ceasefire can hold, you know, I think the worst possibilities are averted from the war. But in terms of the political and economic costs to the U.S., it's gonna, you know, the damage has been done. Essentially, Republican Party, the base has been fractured. The movement is, you know, Republican Party won in 2024 elections because we ran as the party of peace. Now, there's no way we can run as the party of peace. I mean, certainly if, you know, if Trump were to be impeached and removed in January, that would give you know, Vice President Vance long enough to, you know, to prove that he's a peace president. He could end the war in Ukraine in a day. He could, you know, establish eternal peace in the Middle East. But you know, he's going to be forever tied to President Trump, and you know, the chances, of course, of Trump being removed from office are still very low because of all the sycophants he has in the Republican Party, certainly in Congress, and neocons that, you know, might not even like him, but they love that he went to war with Iran because they're you know, they're controlled assets by the state of Israel. So I do think Vance is probably unbeatable. I think even if President Trump endorsed Rubio, I mean, he'd have to really go on the attack against Vance to prevent Vance from winning the nomination. But sadly, the rumors are that Vance is you know, he sees the tea leaves, and he's reportedly considering not running this in the next presidential election because he thinks it's unwinnable. You know, he can win the nomination, and he can do that by a wide margin, but the chances of him winning a general election, you know, with the Republicans branded as the party of war, and you know, with the economic recession that's likely in our very near future, seem pretty low.
You know, he's to me this one figure, maybe together with Tulsi Gabbard, but she's been much less publicly exposed since she was sworn in. That I still wonder, that belief that I think belong to this, yeah, the peace faction and the actual America First faction of the Trump administration, right? And it was so strange to me that I mean, he must have opposed this war. He must have said, like, he that he doesn't think that this is a good idea. I just cannot imagine him signing up for to all of this wholeheartedly. But then he's the one who was sent to negotiate in Islamabad. This is why that strategy? And then also what we know from Professor Marandi and others, that Vance constantly was forced to basically call back to Washington and actually also call back to Tel Aviv in order to check in with the overlords of what can be and what cannot be agreed to. This is a weird, bizarre kind of bizarre way of doing diplomacy, isn't it?
Well, I do think there's you know, quite a logic to it because the Iranians know, of course, that JD Vance opposed the war. They know he's an honest and trustworthy and honorable man, unlike the president of the United States. And so, what better American to lead the delegation than Vice President Vance? And they've said as much. They've said that, you know, basically their view of Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner as their Israeli agents. They don't represent the America. JD Vance represents America, and I think that's a very true statement. So yeah, I mean, well, the irony is that you know, it's been reported again in the U.S. press just in the past few days that JD Vance's national security team is and press team is really just exhausted because they're forced to defend the war, you know, in Iran, which they know perfectly well that their boss hates, their boss opposes, and has been doing everything possible to end it. So what I wrote in my last articles is if the President Vance had been given, you know, full negotiating plenipotentiary power to negotiate on behalf of the United States, if he hadn't had to make 21 calls to President Trump in 21 hours, if he hadn't had to call Netanyahu to get permission on his end because Trump said he had veto power over you know, the nuclear part of the deal, then we would have had a deal on April 11th, and the war would be officially over.
Hmm. Yeah, so in a way, constrain the hands of the last kind of trustworthy or actual peace interested person within the team. What does that mean though? Like we are now nearing the end of like the second war, the second month of this war, and I don't view the war as over yet, but a different phase of it, a less kinetic one, but one in where we will see assaults in different ways. Where does this leave us internationally, with China obviously observing all of this, and according to my sources at the beginning, highly doubtful that Iran would manage to keep standing, but now actually gaining a bit of more trust again in Iran's abilities, and with the Russians who who had a windfall for their oil sales and exports, something that the US and Europe wanted to curb down for the last 4 years, and now they basically achieved the opposite of that. Where does this leave us?
Well, I think it leaves us in a very much worse position internationally. Certainly, in terms of our alliances, are gravely weakened. I mean, we didn't have a single ally, a NATO ally, that came to our assistance. Not they didn't even send a minesweeper. I mean, they didn't even send a non-combat ship, let alone combat forces. And why should they? We didn't consult them. We conducted an illegal war of aggression in violation of international law, in violation of our own constitution. And it was unnecessary and unprovoked. So, but at the same time, I think this gives a lot of impetus, and I've heard it from neocons in the Trump administration and Trump's inner circle, that it may be time to leave NATO. And so I think that would be a really great thing, if the U.S. could leave NATO. I mean, nothing symbolizes the America's liberal empire like our membership in the NATO alliance. And most likely, it wouldn't be leaving NATO; it would be simply leaving the NATO military command structure, withdrawing, perhaps one-third, half of our troops from Europe, and redeploying them back to the United States, and trying to implement Trump's outstanding national security strategy, which he pretty much flushed down the drain with this invasion of Iran, which said that we would basically pull out of much of Europe and the Middle East. We wouldn't, waste our military resources and our, trillions of dollars fighting unnecessary wars in Ukraine and Iran. But that's really where we need to get back to. And I'm just hoping that Trump continues to get a hard dose of reality and understands that he made a huge mistake, a colossal mistake, but it's partially correctable. And if he agrees to most of Iran's terms, I think we can and spin it as a victory, as he always does. He spins defeats as a victory. And, obviously in Venezuela, he spun that as a victory, even though we didn't really accomplish anything. We opened up their economy a little bit, but their communist dictatorship is firmly in place. The U.S. doesn't have any troops there. Last I heard, we were still blockading them, but I think that's probably over because we lifted sanctions on them. But that's what Trump does. Is his basic, his hardcore supporters will believe anything he says. So if he spins defeat as a victory, then he might be able to get away with it.
The alliances in West Asia, in the Gulf, do you think those have any chance of surviving this? Because at the moment, the Gulf states are still, like, out of sheer necessity, basically singing the tune of "Oh, Iran is attacking us, and everything's so illegal. Our alliance with the United States is important and whatnot." But they were basically thrown under the bus, and I'm pretty sure they understand that they were thrown under the bus, and that they were willingly sacrificed, as a sacrifice the United States was willing to do in order to do favors to Tel Aviv. Do you have any? Do you think that these United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, that U.S. Air bases will remain there?
Well, the U.S. bases in the Gulf region have been destroyed, so we'd have to rebuild them, and that would likely take years. I mean, certainly our Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain has been, completely wiped out. So I think, I don't think we'll ever say it, but essentially America's military bases in the Gulf region are, a thing of the past. I think our Gulf allies, they might remain our allies on paper, but in practice, Iran's the new regional hegemon of the Persian Gulf. Basically, Israel is now the hegemon of the Western Middle East, and then Iran basically controls the Eastern Middle East minus Pakistan. So I think that's the new reality, and that's not a win. I mean, that's a huge strategic defeat. And what I predicted on March 5th when I wrote my article on the Real War Substack, that this would completely, change the balance of power both regionally and globally against the United States in our enemy's favor. And just to answer your last question, I think China and Russia and Iran are the biggest victors of this war. Iran, I guess, is, some people find that hard to believe because we certainly did score a lot of military successes operationally against them, but strategically we lost the war. We won every battle famously in Vietnam, but we still, accepted, North Vietnam's peace terms, and then we vacated the region, and South Vietnam fell 2 years later. So that's essentially what this is, and it's not obviously not the same situation, but the similarities increase, I think, the longer this war goes on. And China, of course, has been, they basically control the strait through their Iranian proxy because they're, of course, military allies. So that's 20% of the oil reserves of the world that has to go through IRGC Navy controlled straits. So this is benefit, and not only that, the U.S. has transferred a lot of its military power in terms of THAAD missile batteries out of South Korea and Japan. So our missile defenses have been degraded in the Western Pacific. We have less ships. Obviously, if China were to invade Taiwan in the next couple weeks, there's really nothing we could do about it. So that's the new reality in the Western Pacific as well. I mean, we already were facing tremendous, military disadvantages in terms of missile stocks, but now our Patriot missiles I think, are depleted at least half, 50%, maybe even 70%. According to a couple of national security experts, we only have enough missile defense interceptors to fight 24 hours in high-intensity combat in the Western Pacific with China. So essentially, the war would be decided by day 2 of the war.
What do you think this will finally hurt the neocons in Washington? That they will lose the ear of the president, and that past wars, the neocons tend to just come out as go into hiding for a couple of months or years into some of the think tanks, and then they're right back. They're there with in the Democratic Party. They're there in the Republican Party, and they tend to then have their coalitions with whoever it is locally who can be used, be it the ultra right wing in Ukraine, or be it the Netanyahu government, whoever is on board with more U.S. foreign wars. Do you think that this episode will change anything in that dynamic?
I think it's unlikely, unfortunately. I think, their hold on Trump, and the administration is really kind of a stranglehold. I think it would take President Trump to turn on the neocons and blame all the neocons that said it was, like Hegseth. Hegseth, of course, he was a America First conservative until he wasn't. He was one of the voices in April of last year that convinced Trump not to attack Iran, and that he just did a 180 flip, and is really the worst actor in the White House right now. That was telling Trump that this would be an easy deal; it'd be over in a week. He needs to go. He's corrupt. Corrupt neocon. I think Rubio is going to be, after right now. Of course, Trump is the neocon standard bearer. All the never Trumpers, the neocons, that used to oppose him because he was anti-war, are now his biggest cheerleaders. So like Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro and folks like that. So I think that the neocons, if Trump doesn't turn on them, they're going to remain strong. I mean, they control 99% of members of Congress. In a sense, the ceasefire has saved the neocons. If the war had continued, if it turned into a Vietnam-style conflict with thousands of dead Americans invading Iran, I think there could have been a strong backlash. But if Trump spins this as a victory, and most Republican Party members believe him, I think the neocons are spared and they retain control.
That's too bad. Because they also still try to wreak havoc with Russia, of course. Although in the war in Ukraine, things seem to be going, well, very much in the favor of Russia. What is your assessment there?
I think Ukraine is, it's very close. I think I previously assessed that they could run out of troops effectively. Maybe not all the way out of troops, but the number of troops left by November of this year will be so minimal that I think Russian forces could advance on all fronts. Really, I mean, Russia's had the ability to obviously from just in the first 11 days of the war, their armored formations, 1,100 tanks came within 2 miles of Kyiv, this the capital city of Ukraine, and they were outnumbered. That's the amazing thing is they had 3.5 times less troops in Ukraine than they have today, and they were still able to storm the gates of Kyiv. And of course, if Russian President Vladimir Putin hadn't made the fateful decision to withdraw those Russian troops from 3 Ukrainian northern oblasts, including Kyiv, on March 26th, then to April 4th of 2022, then the war would have been ended on Russian terms with the Istanbul Agreement. And they've retained that ability. They currently have between three and probably close to 4 times as many troops as Ukraine has within Ukraine. So in terms of active duty troops, so really, reportedly, Putin is reluctant to make another run at Kyiv, northern offensive. I've spoken with a member of the Russian army. He's not an officer, but he's kind of a military advisor. He's a former U.S. Officer and U.S. Army officer, and he basically said that the word in military circles is that Putin is fearful that NATO might react if he were to take Kyiv and basically seize control of half the country. So he's been fighting. He's been essentially wearing down and bleeding dry the Ukrainian army with the understanding that if Ukraine doesn't have any troops, it doesn't matter what the cap is in a treaty. If they could say, Ukraine could have a 2 million man army, they won't be able to have more than 150,000 or 200,000 max. So I think it's not the best strategy. I think the casualty count has been 5-1 in Russia's favor over the course of the war, a little bit less than that, but still heavily in favor of Russia. So on one level, in terms of the casualty count, the strategy is working, but it really just doesn't make any sense. Since Russia has had the ability to capture the capital for at least the past couple years, and of course, at the onset of the war, they had it partially surrounded on 3 different sides. It just doesn't make sense to keep fighting the war indefinitely. But I just think that the outcome's inevitable, and I think the Ukrainian army is likely to suffer, a full-scale military collapse by the end of the year.
Yeah, and we must not forget, though, that capturing, even if the Russians captured Kiev, it's like it would not be the end of the war. I mean, the diehards just retreat into Galicia and go to Western Ukraine, and then keep on fighting from there. So at some point, there must be some form of political settlement, one way or another. As all wars need some settlement one way or another. The question just is how bloody does it still have to be in order to get there? Do you have any hope that the United States will finally agree to the Russian terms and then force their proxies in Ukraine and Europe to actually go along with it? Or do you think that the US strategy will keep being what it is at the moment, which is this low-level kind of support of what's going on in order to try to counter-bleed Russia dry?
Well, I think, ironically, Trump really has remained consistent at the private level. He's told, I think it was October, he met with Zelensky in the White House, and it was a profanity-laden meeting. He got, his anger was volcanic, and he threw Zelensky's map on the ground and said, these are the best terms you're going to get. Ukraine's going to be destroyed. You're going to be defeated. You just take the deal. It's a good deal, but what Russia's offering. I think that's true. I think Russia's terms up to now have been fairly reasonable. I think they could be much harsher if the war continues. Obviously, if there's a military collapse, they'll get to set the terms whether Ukraine accepts them or not. And they've made very clear that those terms are not just 4 oblasts, but about 9 oblasts, Ukrainian oblasts. I mean, 5 if you count Crimea. And that would be about 43% of Ukraine's territory and population. So I think that, that may be the grim reality that Ukrainians face, is that if they don't settle this year, Ukraine will be divided, with about 45% under Russian control, perhaps a satellite state or perhaps fully annexed to Russia, and a Ukrainian rump state that's a landlocked country that's even poorer than it is today, and it's very poor. It's the poorest country in Europe by a good margin.
Yeah, of course. Like the Europeans asked the poorest part of Europe to go and die for them against the Russians. So, how high do you think is the likelihood that Russia will try to get Odessa?
Well, what?
Odessa will try to go for
Oh,
Odessa.
yes. I think the chances are, if there's a collapse, I think it's pretty much guaranteed that they would take Odessa, or not guaranteed. I think that's too strong a prediction, but there's a high chance they would take Odessa. I don't think Putin. He's not Hitler. He doesn't want any more territory. He wants 1% more of Ukraine in the Donetsk region. He wants full control of Donetsk. He already has full control of Luhansk. He's got the 3 other oblasts under his control. So that's 20.3% of Ukrainian territory by my count. So that's not a huge region. It's a region that's maybe 1.5 times the size of Lithuania, which is a relatively small Baltic country. So um, I think that there's a lot of hardliners. Putin, of course, we know is not a hardliner in Russian circles. There's a lot of hardliners that would love to see Russia annex half of Ukraine. I just don't think Putin wants it. So even though if there was a full military collapse, I think he would stop on the gates of Kyiv and you know give some of the territory back, even perhaps. But he would certainly insist on maybe a demilitarization of the eastern half of Ukraine, and essentially Ukraine would, for all extents and purposes, become the Russian satellite state if they couldn't have troops in half the country.
Well, okay, so in conclusion, we're basically at a point where both of these wars, the Ukraine war and the Iran war, are not over, but in a kind of stuck. The United States stuck. I mean, you cannot get through what was the original neocon idea of all of these of this warfare, and there's no good reason to believe that this can be reversed anytime soon, right?
Yeah, there is. I mean, certainly the war in Ukraine is unwinnable. The war in Iran is unwinnable. Really it would take, I think, nuclear weapons for us to defeat Iran. That's certainly, I think we could probably maybe achieve regime change, or maybe not, but certainly we could probably take control of the strait if we use nuclear weapons. There was a recent expose where, one of the DoD's top nuclear chief was interviewed and by a undercover reporter, and he said that the U.S. has absolutely no plans to use nuclear weapons against Iran. So that was clearly bluster. I don't think it's going to happen. Yeah, it's completely unwinnable. And I do think Trump's been wanting it out of the war in Ukraine. I think probably he's felt less pressure because Iran's been the biggest issue. But I think he's anxious to kind of move his concerns elsewhere. I think maybe he'll go back to wanting Greenland. I mean, that's really the only thing he's wanted in terms of aggression that I've been supportive of, because there's not a lot of people there. Obviously, it would be a massive violation of Denmark's neutrality, or I guess alliance, because we're allies.
Yeah.
And it would be a territory grab. So it looked really bad, and further damage our alliances. But in terms of an actual, something that's achievable, that doesn't hurt people, and we could, pay off the Greenlandic citizens, $1 billion each or 100,000 each. Everything else, pretty much almost that Trump's doing in terms of invasions or bombings, I think is just really uncalled for, and we need to oppose it.
Well, we'll see where this goes. For people who want to read more of your analysis, they should, of course, first and foremost go to your Substack, therealwar.com, that is, right?
It's dpyne.substack.com. Once again, dpyne.substack.com. And it's the Real War Substack. I named it after President Richard Nixon's seminal book on national security, which kind of informed my foreign policy back when I was in high school in the mid-'80s.
Okay. That I will put a link to your Substack into the description below. David Pyne, thank you very much for your analysis today.
Thanks, Pascal. Always a pleasure.